Chapter 8. Each of Us is Fascinating, Part 1. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think that must have changed several times since then. This is an excerpt from Chapter 5 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. The who, what, when, why, and how. I've never been to a party where someone asked outright, "Who are you?" which would cut to the chase, but is obviously considered a rude opening. Blame it on that caterpillar for setting a poor example. In any event, there are plenty of things people ask each other to figure out the answer to that question. A friend of mine confided that she sometimes thinks she's playing an unofficial game of 20 questions at a party, and it's off-putting, so she just doesn't go anymore. We talked and decided it's because she's transitioning. Life is shifting. She doesn't really know who she is any more than Alice did when quizzed by the caterpillar. So she's uncomfortable with being put on the spot. I think that's understandable. And avoidable if you intentionally think about who you are, because frankly, you are fascinating. She was fascinating. We all are. In this chapter, we'll discover why exploring who we are makes us fascinating. We'll look at who, what, when, why, and how. Each of us is fascinating. Here's a story about the time Garrison Keillor, the author and host of a popular national public radio show called Prairie Home Companion, came to a party at my house. He was in town to kick off a new symphony season. My significant other at the time was a musician, so we knew all the symphony players. Garrison accepted a last-minute invite to the impromptu party, as did most of the 80 symphony members. I started shopping and cooking on Friday morning. The party was at 10 p.m. that night after the concert. Typical of who I was then, I planned a hugely ambitious meal for the whole day in very short time. The turnout was gratifying. The buffet table was spectacular, if I do say so myself. Garrison produced a bottle of Minnesota red wine. I popped the cork and poured samples for everyone. The kitchen was jammed with people. I raised a glass to toast our guest, just as my 7-year-old daughter barreled around the end of the table and threw her arms around me. Red wine surged into the air. I was wearing baby blue silk. Quick change of clothes and back to the kitchen, and there was Philip Brunel, the director of Vocal Essence, standing at the table, assembling a plate. He and my significant other were discussing Bach. I slid into the conversation by offering a napkin. Brunel inquired after my father, having heard he was a big fan of Prairie Home Companion. I nodded and enthusiastically gestured into the air. Brunel's wine glass. It was a direct hit. Red wine splashed onto the cuff of his neatly pleated tuxedo shirt. My significant other grabbed his arm in panic and steered him toward the bathroom. I fussed over the hors d'oeuvres and freaked out over how the evening was going so far. I looked up and Garrison was standing in the doorway to my kitchen, smiling expansively. "This is a great party," he said. "Why don't you come sit down and talk to us?" I nodded, poured a glass of wine, and followed him into the dining room where there was a chair saved for me right next to his. "So," he said, "I understand you're an artist. What do you do?" The others at the table stopped chatting and looked at me expectantly. "Oh," I said, "well, not that much really. A little sewing, a little collage." My sentence hung in the air and he looked at me quizzically. I tried again. Before another word could come out of my mouth, the harpist, beautiful girl, leapt in, regaling everyone with a hilarious story about trying to jam her harp into a Jeep. People roared with laughter. I pushed away from the table and slunk back to the kitchen, to the safety of refreshing the veggie platter. My party was a big success. At 4 a.m., my significant other stood between Garrison and me for a photograph. The orchestra PR person who'd hung around to escort him back to the hotel took a picture. Hugs and thanks were exchanged all around the kitchen, and then our dear friend, John the architect, was already there loading the dishwasher. At such a remarkably late hour, it was so grounding to dry wine glasses and return them neatly to the cupboard. I was exhausted. The PR person called me on Saturday. During the drive back to the hotel at that early hour, she'd asked Garrison whether he enjoyed himself. "I certainly did," he replied, "but that poor woman was a wreck." We all know people who have absolutely no problem telling us how interesting they are. We've all cringed or rankled during the telling. If you grew up in a traditional family, you got the humility lesson early. The one that encourages you to lay down, don't make too big a deal out of yourself. One time I wrote my name on a small notepad in a gas station, and my father angrily wadded up the paper with the admonishment, "Fools' names like fools' faces always show in public places." Needless to say, I felt very foolish indeed. I was only 9. Don't think the gas station experience didn't come flooding back as I stood alone in my kitchen during that symphony party with Garrison Keillor. Fast forward to adult lessons in spirit, culture, energy, and expectation, where I encountered the fresh idea that no one wins if we downplay our talents. Our talents are meant to be used. Each combination is distinctive and fascinating. We are fascinating people, capable of touching others' lives in powerful and life-changing ways. But how to maximize the potential? How to strike a balance between inflated ego and healthy self-esteem? How to proclaim loudly the artist self? Begin by embracing the reality that when you get right down to it, everyone is fascinating. When the playing field is leveled, it's no longer valid to think you are better or worse than anyone else. And that's not even judgment. We're all fascinating in different distinctive ways. If you can accept this, then it's easier to state what we're good at and what we have to offer without sounding braggy. The conversation becomes a discourse on what we bring to the table for the communal good, the qualities we have to share, how best to serve, humbly, graciously. That's the key to self-esteem, defined as having respect for yourself and expecting respect from others just as you extend respect to them. It's a mutual admiration society of the highest order. And how about this? Accepting that everyone is fascinating means you must be fascinating too. There isn't another option. So how to decode your distinctive life experience? How to employ the 5 standard questions used by journalists to write any comprehensive story? Let's look at who, what, when, why, and how. Here's a visual. Picture an elaborate length of fabric with multicolored woven patterns made of textured threads. The overall effect is intriguingly complex. Every thread contributes to the patterns. But even better, pull out several threads to unravel the cloth slightly, and you'll discover the threads are different weights and textures. some shiny, some matte, each interesting by itself. But the fabric is a perfect example of microcosm and macrocosm. The threads are distinctive up close. The woven cloth is distinctive from a distance. You are that cloth. Each thread of your experience contributes something. Together, the threads weave the fascinating whole cloth story that is yours. You could begin today to write the story of your life from the earliest memory you recall right up to this present moment. Perhaps the writing would go easily enough, but formative moments and events have a tendency to get buried in this giant pile of life experienced by anyone older than 7. The forest is too close to see the trees. Putting a few parameters around the telling speeds up the process and also the clarity that arises from it. As your guide, I propose a strategy that has worked for me, and I have seen it work for others. Begin with directed writing and get the shitty first draft down on paper. Then edit, and as you do, ask the 5 questions: who, what, when, why, and how. The goal is to discern life experiences that shaped your artist self by following the thread linking earliest experiences to where you are right now. Writing identifies each station on the path that has led to claiming and strengthening your artist self. Next, practice telling it so that if anybody asks, you've got your story down and you're good at it, with clarity, humility, and humor. When I see Garrison Keillor again, and he inquires as to whether I am an artist, I want to answer quickly before the harpist interrupts me with a clear and buoyant, yes, 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 buddy, I am an artist. Know thyself. Many artists decide they want to be represented by a gallery. There are definitely advantages to this, and it's often high on an artist's list of goals. A good gallery invests in artists, not only by advertising and selling work, but also by acting as advisor, nurturing and educating those whom they choose to represent. A successful relationship with a gallery requires effort on the part of both artist and staff. If your goal is to sell work, there is a definite advantage to showing in a space where the gallery is invested in knowing your story. Imagine the following scenario. I walk into a gallery and am drawn to a work on the wall across the room. I stride immediately to the wall and study the artwork carefully. In an unmonitored setting like a university gallery or an alternative art space, no one is going to approach me to tell me anything more about the artist or the work. I have to figure it out on my own. Maybe there will be a posted artist statement. I may love what I see, but I might talk myself out of buying it because there's no one around to encourage the sale. On the other hand, if artwork hangs in a commercial space, complete with staff, the scenario is often quite different. In a good gallery, a staff person waits patiently while I peruse the work and then approaches me, asking whether I would like to know more about any particular artist. I might be in a hurry and defer, but it's just as likely to tweak my curiosity. Yes, I would like to know a little bit more, I say. The staff person launches into the artist's story, distinctive qualities of the work, maybe the fact that materials are unusual or unexpected, and a few anecdotes told to prove what a fascinating person the artist is. The artist grows more human and likable right before my eyes. I understand his or her struggle or aesthetic. I begin to think I might like to support this aesthetic or contribute to winning that struggle. It's a peripheral advantage that I like the work very much, and maybe I can even afford it. The sale is made, and everyone wins. You may not be ready for gallery representation or choose not to go that route for one reason or another, or you haven't done it, but it's on your list. No matter where you are on the continuum, It's worth it to write your story. Assemble the highlights and fascinating parts into one document. This delineates the script you'll use to talk about yourself effectively later, whether you're asked to do so at a juried exhibition or are writing a statement you intend to submit formally to a gallery. Or it actually works even if you just want to understand yourself better.